On this week's episode of the Best of Johnson County podcast, we have a special edition episode that we call Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. And in this podcast, our social media coordinator, Raina Birch, asked me, Jonathan Breeden, about child custody during the school breaks from school. We discussed what happens during track out and traditional school calendars in the summers, along with fall break, spring break, and Easter, and how that often falls in custody cases. If you're interested in how your custody case may end up or how custody cases are handled outside of the holidays, listen in. I think you'll find it interesting and fascinating, and maybe it'll help you make a better decision in your own situation.
Welcome to another episode of Best of Johnston County, brought to you by Breeden Law Office. Our host, Jonathan Breeden, an experienced family lawyer with a deep connection to the community, is ready to take you on a journey through the area that he has called home for over 20 years. Whether it's a deep dive into the love locals have for the county or unraveling the complexities of family law, Best of Johnston County presents an authentic slice of this unique community.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Best of Johnston County podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden. And on today's episode, we have a special edition episode we like to call Ask Jonathan Breeden Anything. And in these special edition episodes, our social media coordinator, Raina Birch, asked me, Jonathan Breeden, family law questions. And today's questions are going to relate to child custody during the school year and child custody that is not related to the holidays. Go back and listen to one of our previous episodes where we talked about child custody during the holidays. Today, we're going to talk about child custody during the school year. As you know, our normal format for this podcast is for me, Jonathan Breeden, to interview interesting people in and around Johnson County, community leaders, small business owners, and stuff like that. But every once in a while we do these special edition episodes, which is what we're doing today, where I talk about family law, which is what we do here at the Breeden Law Office. But before we get to that, I would like to ask you to like, follow, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, or X now, was Twitter. And so you'll be aware of future episodes of the Best Johnson County podcast. The Best Johnson County podcast comes out every single Monday and has now for well over 18 months. So you go back and listen to some of our previous episodes. We've had almost all of the county commissioners on our podcast, Congressman Brad Knott, along with lots of small business owners. And if you love Johnson County as much as I do, this is the podcast for you. Ready, Raina?
I'm ready. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. So the first question, pretty basic one, but I mean, it's always good to have an answer to it. So everybody's heard of the traditional school calendar and long summer, few weeks off for like winter or spring break. But what about year-round schools those are becoming more and more common. So how does that impact custody?
Right. So, you think about a traditional school calendar, there's going to be 10 to 12 weeks in the summer consecutively off. Yeah. School will get out, in Johnston County, later part of May, in Wake County, middle of June 10th, June 12th, somewhere like that. Yep. And then it's going to go back around August the 25th. There's been some debate about whether that's going to get moved up to maybe a week earlier or 2 weeks earlier as we move forward. But right now, most traditional calendar schools start the closest Monday to August 25th because that's what the statute says. And so if you have a traditional calendar, most of the time, if you live near each other and you're doing some sort of shared custody, if you're doing a shared custody week on, week off, nothing changes, okay? If you are a parent that's getting less than week on, week off, then normally in the summer and you live contiguous is the word, or near the other parent, you would then almost always in a court get week on, week off in the summer, which would allow you 5 or 6 weeks, depending on how long the traditional summer is, to travel with the child, go wherever we want to go, stuff like that. Usually it's Sunday at 6 to Sunday at 6, and that's how it would go. If you're dealing in a situation where you have one parent that lives far away and they're not able to get regular visitation in the summer, then that parent is usually going to get 6 to 8 weeks of that 10 to 12 week summer, so they get some of the time they don't get during the school year with the child as well. And then the parent that lives farther away, if they're not able to get every other weekend or any kind of shared visitation, they're also going to get every spring break from school out to the day school resumes. Depending on how far they are, they may get fall break as well. And then, of course, we talked about earlier, they're going to get at least 1 week at Christmas one year, and they're probably going to get 2 weeks at Christmas the next to make up for some of the time they don't get
during the school year.
Yeah. But as it comes to year-round schools, which I guess was your original question, and Wake County is the only school system in our area that has a year-round calendar. I mean,
And
they
like
have
90% of their schools are year-round.
well, the elementary schools.
The elementary and middle schools.
Right,
there's a
the
lot
middle
of them.
schools, I think it might be
Like
less than
half and
50-50,
half,
yeah. But the majority of the elementary schools
Yeah.
are. So what happens with year-round is you go for 9 weeks, and then you get 3 weeks off. And you go for 9 weeks, you get 3 weeks off. But everybody gets the week of July 4th off, and everybody gets the 2 weeks at Christmas, and that doesn't count. So that kind of messes up this general rule, depending on if there's a holiday around your normal time. So the most common track in Wake County is track 4.
Yes.
And so with track 4, you end up getting the 2 weeks at Christmas, and then you also get the first 3 weeks of January off. So you end up with a 5-week period. Now, in most custody orders, the 2 weeks around Christmas is going to be governed by one provision. The 3 weeks of track out is going to be governed by a different provision in the order.
Because one of them's holiday time and one of them's...
Correct. And so depending on how it's written, it may not go exactly like this. But the majority of the time on a track out, it's divided in half. And one side will get the first 11 or 12 days, and the other side will get the second 11 or 12 days. There's usually 3 weekends in a track out.
Yeah.
And so you put 15 days plus 3 weekends. You got another 6, 21. So there's usually at least 21 days, 22 days in a track out if there's not a holiday in it. And so you would often exchange on the Wednesday in the middle.
Got it.
So if it starts on a Friday, you go a week and a half, and then that Wednesday, it goes the other. Now, if it's your time during track out, you're responsible for the track out camp.
Yep.
And that means you may have to split the cost if there's a week where the child's half yours their week, half the other parent during the week.
Yep.
But, it's the same thing with summer. You may have to put them in summer camp. You may have to put them in track out camp. But it's your responsibility to provide child care for the child during the track out periods.
Yep, and if you're going to split costs or anything like that, then you've got to agree with your co-parent on which camp they're going to and how much that's going to cost. And all of that takes pre-planning. So start doing that now, like not 2 weeks before. Try 2, 3, 4 months before that starts happening.
Right. I agree.
All right, so next question. So do you need a completely different custody plan for year-round schools? So just in case your kid switches to a year-round school or your base school changes and it changes to a year-round school with all these new schools that they're building.
Most judges are not going to put in a and or clause if they're not already in year-round school, okay? They're going to address it where it is.
Yep.
Rarely will you see a judge say, but in Wake County sometimes they will because there's so many year-round schools, but usually if the child, when you start the custody case, if they're in a year-round school, they stay in a year-round school because usually parents stay in the same general school district, but my experience has been they often don't do either or, right? They say, okay, this is what we're going to do, and then you can either then reach an agreement with the other parent as to what you're going to do if you end up in a year-round situation, or you go back to court, and the court will give you a year-round visitation schedule, custody schedule, based on year-round. Hopefully, in the vast majority of cases, particularly if you're already sharing the summers, you could just do this, a very simple amendment. We're going to split the track outs, on that Wednesday. It's usually a Wednesday, and move forward from there. Again, it's all about communication and trying to be fair to both sides.
Yeah, and for any parents listening, track 4 is the reason why it's so popular is because it is the closest one to the traditional calendar schools.
Correct, because they get July off.
Yes.
So they get July. They also get part of October into early November. They then get the 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of January, and then they also get April.
Yeah,
I think
track 4 just went back in, as we're recording this, just went back into session.
Right, and this is at the end of April. So so that part is nice. And not all the year-round schools in Wake County are multi-track. The majority of them are single-track year-round, which is track 4, because it looks the most like the traditional calendar.
Yep, and so, if they're in track 4, then you might not need as many amendments or as many, it might line up better. But
right. Another problem you run into is when you have a child that's not on a year-round calendar because they're in a middle school or a high school has no year-round.
None.
Or middle school, that becomes a real problem because all of a sudden, even if it is track 4, you're talking about 1 or 2 weeks that overlap total.
Yep.
And so it becomes very important that, however, there's very few weeks where they overlap, that those particular weeks also get divided equally so that each side can possibly take a vacation. Particularly because really, if you're on track 4 and your kid's in high school, you've got basically those weeks in July.
That's it.
Everybody gets the week of July 4th off,
Yep.
regardless of what school you are, year-round, whatever. You come back after July 4th, you're in your new school year. That's when your new school year starts. You're promoted, get a new teacher, all that. But that's where it gets to be. But literally, if you really have July 4th and like 1 or 2 weeks thereafter, and that's it, where both kids are out of school at the same time outside of the holidays throughout the entire year.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it, because I have a high schooler who's obviously in a high school that's not year-round because they don't exist. But I also have an elementary schooler who is in a year-round school and on track 4. And I can tell you from personal experience, the only summer vacation that lines up is usually June 28th to July 28th. That's it.
Yep.
And you have to factor in holiday time for July 4th. And then, my oldest has a birthday, so that's different than vacation time. And both parents are entitled to see their kids on their birthday and whatnot. So it can definitely be a little wonky sometimes, and it definitely want to address it in your agreement for sure.
Right.
As far as, what track they get into, because track 4 isn't always available. So.
Right.
All right, next question. Can you travel with your child during these breaks, summer vacation, track out, however whatever breaks they are?
Yes, you can absolutely travel with your child. Depending on what your court order says, most court orders say if you're going to take a child out of state, that you should notify the other parent as to where you're going, where you're going to be staying, a way for the child to be communicated with, whether they have a phone, you have a phone, or whatever, and when you're coming back. That's just a common courtesy that people should do. In the high conflict cases, judges are going to put that into the order that you have to let them know at least 7 to 21 days in advance if you're going to take the child out of the state. Kind of let them know where you're going. Because if something happens, they need to know where they'll be able to find their child.
Yes.
And I think that's important. In the non-high conflict cases, you're probably going to do that anyway. In the high conflict cases, sometimes you have to get a court order that says you have to do these so that everybody's on the same page as to where the child is located. And now, in the high conflict cases, when you start leaving the country and the passports, if there's some concern there, you may need to get the judge, when you get your custody order, if you think you're going to have a problem, to address who's going to possess the passports, where the children can travel using that passport, and stuff like that. If you have a parenting coordinator, because it's a really high conflict case where the parenting coordinator is making a lot of decisions on behalf of the judge, often the parenting coordinator will keep the passport and give it to the parent the week before they leave the country with the child, and then they will keep the passport back. So, that is something to consider if you think you're in a high conflict case, or you are, address what is the child going to get a passport, and what happens to the passport, who has it, how do you access the passport to take the child on vacation, and stuff like that.
Because it's not like a birth certificate or a social security card. You can't get a copy of that.
Correct.
You're only allowed to have one. So
Correct.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Have family law questions? Need guidance to navigate legal challenges? The compassionate team at Breeden Law Office is here to help. Visit us at www.breedenfirm.com for practical advice, resources, or to book a consultation. Remember, when life gets messy, you don't have to face it alone.
All right, so next question. So how in your experience working with obviously a ton of parents in custody cases and whatnot, how do you see parents splitting school breaks fairly? Like either in-state or out-of-state, in the same town? How do you think that school breaks generally are split fairly?
Well, the easiest way is just do week on, week off, particularly in the summers. And look, you can even do week on, week off with track out, where one track out you get 2 weeks, and then the next track out you get 1.
Yeah.
That still equalizes it.
Yes.
I think the key is it's important, even if the custodial schedule during the school year is not 50-50, that the vacations, if you're in the area and you're getting visits during the year and you don't live in California, be as equal as possible, right? That's the time. It's unstructured time. Child to be somewhere. It's time to take a trip. I love to travel. You love to travel. Take a cruise. Go to Disney World.
Yeah.
All that fun stuff. The things that you actually have memories of when you become an adult from your childhood. The experiences that people have, stuff like that. So I think it's important to try to divide that time in an equal manner so that everybody has a chance to take vacation with a child or spend unstructured time with a child.
Yes.
When they're in school, they're in school. 8 or 9 hours a day. So they don't, even if you didn't
And then
go
after
anywhere.
school, there's usually after school activities and
Right. Even if you don't go anywhere, just to be able to take them to Marbles Kids Museum or Top Golf or putt or
the new park that's going to open up in Raleigh. That's the largest park.
Well, the Dick's Park is going to take them. They're going to take them a while to build it. It's going to be a nice park.
Yeah, but like all these new parks that are opening up all
Frankie's
around.
Fun Park, Adventure Landing. I mean, there's tons of places that you might not have time during when they're in school. Maybe they're more crowded.
Yeah.
The bounce house places or the trampoline
insanity.
parks. Defy gravity. I mean, like that kind of stuff. So everybody wants to do that, and everybody should have the opportunity to be able to do that. Go see Grandma.
There you go.
I mean, go see Grandma. Like everybody, Grandma might not live right here. Go see Grandma. Go see your cousins.
So, but what about the breaks because obviously fall break is going to always be during the weekend or the week of Thanksgiving. That's a given. And Christmas break is going to be during Christmas. But spring break is often not the exact same week every year. Sometimes it's the week before Easter. Sometimes it's the week after. Sometimes it's not related at all.
Right. Well, to correct you, most school systems now do a Monday, Tuesday fall break in October. Usually about the end of the first grading period, they will have a Monday, Tuesday. One will be where the kids are out, so you end up getting a long weekend in the middle of October.
Like a teacher workday deal.
Usually around, I think it's President's Day. I don't know what's in October, but whatever, sometime around that. And then you have Thanksgiving break, which in North Carolina schools don't go to school on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday of Thanksgiving. That is pretty much universal in North Carolina. Yes. And so what you would do is the way most court orders are written with spring break is it's the day school's out for the break until the day before school resumes.
Yeah.
So the day school out at 6 p.m. to the day school before school resumes at 6 p.m.
Yep.
And that way, even if Easter is at the front or if it's at the back, you're going to get that weekend. Because the break, right? North Carolina, they don't go to school on Good Friday because Good Friday is a state holiday. It's not a federal holiday, it's a state holiday. So, if they're going to do it the week after Christmas, they're going to start on Thursday. They're not going to go to school on Good Friday. And then if that's your time, then that's your time to have every other Easter.
Yes.
If Easter's important to you, you want to go to church, dress up, Easter egg hunts, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, no, and if you have a week on, week off schedule already during the school year, and maybe one year spring break falls on dad's time, and then the next year, because of how the school calendar worked out and maybe how your calendar worked out, if you switch weeks every year, like kind of.
Right, so I think that spring break should be its own thing because it does not on, week off, automatically reverse because spring break is often connected to Easter. Now, Wake County does not connect spring break to Easter. Wake County runs spring break as its own separate thing. Mm-hmm. Johnston and Harnett, I believe, both connect spring break to Easter every year. We just finished I think this is about the latest Easter you can have of April 18th or 19th, 20th, like that. Easter really can't get later than that. And so it does move around. But Wake County this year in 2025, recording this, had spring break 2 weeks prior to Easter. Mm-hmm. And it often does, particularly when Easter is later in the year.
Yeah. So always, I would say look at the school calendars when they come out because they come out a year ahead of time. Like you can look at the 2025-26 school calendar right now.
Correct.
And work that out or, work out the days and the holidays and the breaks to see, okay, dad had spring break last year, so mom should have spring break the coming year.
Right, and the order should say that.
Yes.
And then, work accordingly.
Exactly. All right, so last question. What happens if parents disagree about the school calendar and what to do during during school breaks?
Well, if you don't have a court order and you disagree, you can file a custody action and go to court and have the court decide what the custody schedule is going to be and what's going to happen during the summers and the holidays and all of that. You always have the option to go to a judge and get a judge to decide what it's going to be if you cannot agree. Even if you agree that it's going to be 50-50 and it's going to be whatever, but you can't agree on the holidays or you can't agree on summers or whatever, you can go to court and say, Judge, all right, we already agree what we're doing the school year. We need you to make a decision on the summers or the holidays because we can't agree on that. And the court will make whatever decision you ask them to. Now, the judge doesn't know you, your children, your situation, or anything, and he's going to have maybe 10 or 15 other cases he's dealing with that day. But if you can't agree, he or she, elected judge, will make the decision, and then that will become the law, and then you'll have to follow.
Yep. And how soon would you recommend somebody do that before whatever break that they're talking about is coming up?
Oh, at least 6 months. Okay. Because it'll take you up to 6 months to get a temporary custody hearing, particularly in Wake County. Usually in Johnston and Harnett, you could probably have a temporary custody hearing in 2 or 3 months, but it can easily take 6 months in Wake. So yes, you need to be thinking about it a lot sooner than you thinking about the break.
Yes, and then and you mentioned temporary custody hearing. How long does temporary custody last for?
Well, I mean, a temporary custody hearing is usually limited to 1 hour, and the court will make a decision, and then that order will hold until it's replaced by a permanent custody order.
Oh, okay.
And if it's never replaced by a permanent custody order, the temporary order after 1 year will become permanent, and it will just hold until it's modified by another court order. So basically, once you get a court order signed by a judge, that order holds until the court enters another order.
Okay. Or the year, and then you can petition, I guess, to have it be made a permanent one.
Well, it sort of becomes that automatically if you don't try to review it. And a lot of people don't. They just start living with it. They see that it's working for them, and they just let it go.
Let it happen.
Save a lot of money that way.
That's very true.
It's expensive to go to court.
Extremely. All right, that's all we have.
Well, cool. Well, thanks. I'd like to thank Raina for coming on and helping us with this episode of what to do for custody during the breaks during the year, separate from the holidays. As we'd like to ask you, go back and listen to the one where we talked specifically about the holidays that ran a few weeks ago if you have any questions about custody during the holidays. Or you can also reach out to us here at the Breeden Law Office. You give us a call at 919-661-4970 or reach out to us at breedenfirm.com. We're glad to answer any of your custody questions that you may have. Also, as we reminded you earlier, please like, follow, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're seeing it. Tag us in your Instagram stories, Best of Johnston County, and leave us a 5-star review down below because it will help increase our visibility. I'm talking too fast. Until next time, I'm your host, Jonathan Breeden.
That's the end of today's episode of Best of Johnston County, a show brought to you by the trusted team at Breeden Law Office. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing more interesting facets of this community next week. Every story, every viewpoint adds another thread to the rich tapestry of Johnston County. If the legal aspects highlighted raise some questions, help is just around the corner at www.breedenfirm.com.